morning, good morning. Yes, we're back again. It's the Wandering Jew and the Practicing Jew, Rabbi Levi Cunin of the Chabad in Malibu. And it's Michael E. Gerber of Wandering Wherever I happen to be finding myself at any particular distraught time in these lockdown days. How incredibly difficult this has been. So Levi, I'm complaining, and there you are living with your 9 children and your wife in your little abode in Malibu, California. How is it?
Well, Baruch Hashem, we're doing good. You know, it's really truly astounding how powerful the change is that's right before our eyes. It's just I can't get over it.
Talk to me about
well, number one, I feel so blessed. Thank God we're okay, and I really hope that there'll be a shift and a turn. The numbers are not looking great right now, and all the different predictions. But then again, who could trust those? But what I mean is that there's just so many different unknowns that continue to come before us, you know, and there, you know, it's so interesting to me. I recall, it reminds me of when I went to Russia in 1993, I was sent to Russia as a yeshiva boy. I was learning in Australia. My father called me up and said, "We need you in Russia." I said, "But the Rabbi sent me here." I said, "If the Rabbi sends me to Russia, I go to Russia." And the next thing I know, I'm on the plane to Russia. When I got there, I was there for a very important cause, which continues till today. A large library and collection of manuscripts and artifacts, holy artifacts from the Chabad Rebbes, were confiscated in 1917. My father was spearheading and continues to spearhead the project of the return of those books, and I went to assist him. And when I got there, I met these people that have been living their entire lives in a communist system and corrupt up to the kazoo, and the poverty was horrible. I remember I was blessed to be involved in feeding 10,000 people, and literally it cost less than $1 to give them 2 weeks worth of food when I was there. So one of my interactions that I had was with the elderly Jews that over the years, they had to be discreet about their Judaism. But now that things were getting looser, easier, and then Judaism was allowed to come back in a revealed way where people were allowed to not be afraid to go to synagogue. So all these elderly Jews that grew up as practicing Jews had been robbed of their practice for all those years, started to flock back to the synagogue. And as a result of that, although at the time I was, 19 years old, something like that, a little bit older, I formed close relationships with some of these elderly Jews, some of them in their 90s. And I remember, I wish I could find the video of that. I took the video of one of these fellows who had such a beautiful vibe about him. And I asked him, and so we were talking about, you know, what the troubles are in the different countries. And after I got through asking him, you know, what the struggles are in their environment, he asked me, he said, "So what do people suffer from in America?" And I just remember, it didn't take me long to say, you know what, I think, if I remember correctly, 50% of our country is on Prozac or something similar. Our country is suffering from a lot of people that are depressed. And I can't begin to tell you or describe to you how this guy began to laugh. Because he kept on asking me, like, what are they depressed from? I said, well, they have food. Yeah, they have food. They have dress. Yeah, they have clothes. They have time. Yeah. Nobody's watching over their shoulder to see where they're going now. So why are they depressed? And it occurred to me afterwards that, you know, part of that which comes with the lifestyle of that we live is we have time on our hands, and that time on our hands could take us into different directions, you know. But usually we worry about one thing, 5 things. Today, a person could sit and worry for a whole week, and they'll never repeat the one worry about the future, you know. And I think in a certain sense, it's so incredible to me, at least, to see how little control we really have. We think we have control until we realize we don't. And this is something that I've just been thinking about. It's like, wow, how in control we thought we were, and we don't have that control. So that's why the way I've been sharing with people is in the environment and the background that I grew up in, the narrative is not negative. The narrative is something lending itself to something new. We're meant to be present and as positive as we possibly can as we embrace whatever's in front of us. I can tell you what I think, but the point is that I feel so blessed to be able to get present to the environment in that way and to share it with others, to bring calm to it, and let's try to be present to this magnificent change that's happening right now everywhere around the world, across all religions, across all races. It's incredible when we think about it. When we pause to think about it. So that's kind of where my mind has been hanging out while in between the time that I'm with my children, spending time with them, learning with them, playing with them, etc.
So when you said we thought, we believed we had control of our lives, and we suddenly realized we don't, are you speaking about the virus?
Correct.
Or are you speaking about the politics?
I'm speaking about the virus and the exponential impact that it's having on so many other areas of our lives. Some of which we know about today, some of it which we'll find out about tomorrow. But it's interesting. I think I've shared this with you in the past, where there's an old Yiddish saying, Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. Man thinks and plans and God laughs. And it's what I'm saying is that all of the predictions that often people have about what's going to happen in a week or 2 weeks or a month from now, we do our best and we live our lives to make assessments, make evaluations and judgments, etc. But we really don't have the control the way that we think we do, And I think that's something.
So bring that back to the question that I asked you at the beginning of this. So Levi, how's it going in your life, in your home, and with 9 children and your wife?
Kenanahara. I said Kenanahara, which is what you say, poo, poo, poo. My mother doesn't let us count.
Your mother doesn't let you count?
Yeah, we don't. It's an old Jewish thing. It's not just a thing. It's actually we're going off, but I'll just tell you, we're not meant to count. You ever heard the what's his name song? You never count your money when you're sitting at the table. Well, that's a Jewish thing. You're not supposed to count in front of other people because it elevates a person's jealousy, and that has energy to it.
I got it. Well, wonderful. So we continued our conversation yesterday. I end these conversations candidly feeling dumber than when I walked into them. And that's a continuing spiral effect. I come to the realization of how little I really know. And so here I am in a public environment, revealing how little I really know. And I realize that when somebody asked me, so where did that come from, meaning a book I wrote, the particular book was The E-Myth Revisited, and my response was flippantly, I made it up. And they said, what do you mean you made it up? And I said, well, in actuality, I did make it up. It was a story I made up. And it's based upon my experience, and based upon my projected experience, based upon conclusions I've reached, based upon my experience and the experience of other people. But I made it up. I wrote the story. I created the story. God gave me a gift. And much more than that, I can't truly say. Where that comes from, how that arises, how the words come together, how my life comes together, how the pieces and parts come together and fall apart, all the mistakes I've made in my life, all of the incredibly foolish decisions I've made in my life, all of that comes together in one life. And so in this process of having this conversation, we're not going really very deep. We're simply touching on the surface of it. As I begun to read Torah, in the limited way that I'm reading Torah, simply on the left side of the page, not on the right side of the page. I'm not reading the notes about, I'm not reading the commentary about, I'm not reading the thoughts about, I'm not reading the considerations about, I'm not reading the Kabbalah about. I'm simply reading from the left page, and then. That's all I'm doing. And yet, as I'm doing that, I'm coming to this realization that it never even struck me that at one point, when we talk about the flood, God created the flood and annihilated all living creatures on the planet, with the exception of Noah and his 3 sons.
Yeah. And their wives, of course.
And their wives, of course, and the 2 giraffes and the 2 lions and the 2 monkeys and on and on and on and on. We all know the story. It's like a bedtime story. But it wasn't a bedtime story. It was a story as serious as any story that's ever been written. Eradicated all life on earth to begin again. And then I'm reading Begin Again, and the very first thing I read is one of the sons castrates his father, Noah, which never came to my attention ever before. And I'm suddenly reading about the horror of then the next family of human beings on the planet, none of which is reflected in anything I've ever read historically, geographically, socially, scientifically, et cetera, and so forth. So we have this story and we have this story. And I'm speaking with you, and your story, your truth, effectively comes from one side of that planet. Forget about my truth. I don't have a truth. I'm making this up as I go along. I don't have a truth. But your truth is on one side of the planet. Follow the bouncing ball, follow the bouncing ball, and then. And it begins with the acceptance of, and God spoke to, and here we are. And then as the principled foundation of all that, the 2 whatever million who left Egypt at the foot of Mount Sinai, waiting for Moses to come down. So talk to me about that.
I want to first preface it by saying how happy I am that you're doing that. Are you doing that in the big blue chumash, the Torah, the blue one?
Yeah.
Okay. I will say to you, it's great that you're doing the just the actual translation, but when you start reading the commentaries, and if it's the same one, if the ones from the Rebbe's chumash, they bring a lot of life to some of those stories in a different way. So just once in a while, at least when you're doing, but I understand why you're doing it, what you're doing. So do you know the word Hebrew, the word Hebrew? It actually it evolved from the first Hebrew. Do you know who the first Hebrew was?
No.
The first Hebrew was Abraham. The word Hebrew in Hebrew is Ivri. Okay? And he was an Ivri. What was an Ivri? A Hebrew? A Hebrew means from the other side. Because everyone in his society believed then in all different types of stuff. The sun, the moon, the astrological, etc. For real, that's what you can read about the times.
It's just the way you said it. Just the way the sun, the moon, it's just the way you said it.
I got you. So here comes Abraham with this radical idea that there's only one force that brings us all into being. And it's radical. The king at the time tries to murder him unsuccessfully. And many stories happen. And this is all before the Torah tells us of him having any interaction with Hashem. In fact, that doesn't happen till he's in his 70s. So here he is, a 3-year-old child begins discovering monotheism, lives his life radical in comparison to everyone around him, and only later on does he get validated by the force and the maker for that which he believed to be true to become revealed. Our forefathers are kind of the preface to our whole story. And we're kind of, the Jewish people in the Torah itself is described as, you will always be the fewest amongst the nations.
You will always be the fewest among the nations.
Correct. Meaning.
And where did that?
It's in the Torah. It says you are, it doesn't say you will always be. It says eventually that won't be the case. But throughout history, until Mashiach times, you are the fewest amongst the nations. Like the smallest nation amongst the nations in terms of population. And yet that's kind of our story. We've been like that over history. There's a reason why over 50% of the Nobel Peace Prize winners for those who introduced all types of radical ideas are actually Jewish people. There's something that is about our story that at times what we're saying and how we're saying things may seem very, very radical to people. But as it happened in the past, that's part of the process until it's not radical anymore. So take, for example, like the whole idea of creation, most people don't think about what the word creation means. When we think about creating, we think about taking, like, for example, we look at the one who made this and we say they created it. They didn't create it. Even the person who had the idea for it didn't create it. What we've done is we formed it. We took it from something and we put it into a different form. Even when we have new ideas, we're still taking it from the realm of ideas, from something that exists, you know? They tell about the scientist who was an atheist and one day finally turns up and he says, now the only thing we couldn't do is create, I'm gonna create on my own. I'm gonna prove that there's no higher force in the world. And suddenly a voice comes down and says, I'm in. So he says, create a human being. So the scientist now goes down to the earth to pick up the earth where he's about to form a human being, and he hears a voice saying, that's my earth. Make your own earth. So the point is that the ideas of this and the stories of the Torah it's very important for us to also put it in the context of what it is that we're struggling up against when we read those stories. And what we're struggling up against is what we refer to as the normal way of us thinking, which is absolutely injected in our minds from the time that we're children. And part of the beauty of what the Torah kind of pulls us to do is, as you'll see specifically through questions, is to pull us out of that and say, but what if? But what if? You know? So the idea that the story that the Torah and the way that the Torah talks about, for example, saying creation, going back to creation is something that we can't even imagine, because we can only imagine the after effects, what we're in. We're in the creation. It's impossible for us to imagine that, which is a priori the idea of creation. So when we think of things having an origination, we think of the evolution of things. That's how it is. Here's another part, maybe you saw, or maybe you didn't pick up on, maybe you did or didn't. At the beginning, Adam. Remember when Adam was created? Do you know how old Adam was when he was created?
20.
Think about that. That kind of messes up our whole way of how we measure things. Because that means it started at already a middle point. If we were to measure Adam at that time in his being, we would discover all of the biology of a 20-year-old human being, although he was just created. So what I'm saying is that the whole conversation of monotheism and creation pushes us and pulls us, I should say, to a conversation that's kind of radical for what is common to us. So having said that, the same is true about many of the stories of the Torah. As I shared with you, the stories of the Torah are super important, even at their simple level, and they are explained at that level. There are many, many commentaries that follow up on most questions that people have been answered. But then there's a deeper conversation. The evolution of man in accordance to the Torah. The first to be created, one of them is a murderer. Cain.
Say that again.
One of the first people on this earth was a murderer. Cain. He killed half the population, a quarter of the world's population, by killing his brother. So what we see there is that the universe has certain components to it, and we need to really be present to that. And yes, there's a purpose to it all, and yes, there's a light. Not just at the end of the tunnel. There's a light right now. The end of the tunnel could be right this second. But we are called upon to look at the world, not just from the physical stories of them, but the energies that drove that. What drove one of Noah's children to castrate him? What drove that? Where was that coming from? What drove Cain to kill his brother? The world, the whole world. What drove him to kill? All of this is teaching us about the nature of the force of darkness that is a part and parcel of the project that we're in, that we call our world or our universe. You know, there's a purpose to it all, there's a reason to it all, but all of that is introducing to us, not just in the stories itself, but more importantly, energetically, what it is that we are here to overcome, to transform, so that the result will look like something that could never have happened if not for the fact that we had to go through this duality, if not for the fact that we had to struggle with what we call darkness, which is simply an agent of that which needs to eventually come about, which unfortunately comes about through the challenges that darkness brings forth. So I'm not sure, I don't know that you had a question, but I'm saying, but many the stories of Noah, I recall, I'll tell you, interesting, you're reading Noah now. One of the high level executive. Go ahead.
Let me speak to.
Go ahead, please.
What you just said, and we're running out of time, so I'll leave this as the question for our next conversation. This is Friday, so Shabbat Shalom. And but we began with the conversation about a story and the realization of how little I know. And I've created the world I live in. Now hear me when I say that in the context of what you've just said, that I don't create. In reality, I reorchestrate or reorganize pieces and parts that I've been provided and assemble them into a new puzzle. So let's just say that I've been adept at doing that. But the Jewish people have been adept at doing that. The Muslim people have been adept at doing that. The Christian people have been adept at doing that. All the conversations, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, and all the conversations lead on to the rationalization for the conversation that preceded it, and the rationalization of the conversation that preceded that, which effectively, if you don't understand that, then you must be the dumbest man on the planet. And it's so simple. Let me show you it again. Let me show you it again. And then all it comes down to is faith. You either believe or you don't. But you don't even have to believe. All you have to do is act as though you believe. And as you act as though you believe, you'll gradually believe, and it will come to you as a blessing from above, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth, and so on. But understand, I'm saying now to you, but understand that's also the way it works in every category of influence on the planet. In short, the story that you have been telling us is a story that's been created by men. It's a story that's been created by men in order to demonstrate the truth of a story created by a man, in this particular case, Abraham, which is monotheism. There are not a lot of, it's not the sun and the moon, There is one creator of all this, and his name is, and then all the names of Hashem, and so forth, and so on, and so forth, and so on. And that's been created and recreated and improved upon ever since the very beginning that story began. And you're quite excellent at telling it. What I'm trying to get to is what resides beneath it, behind it, before it, which you've said countless times is inexplicable. It's impossible for us to understand.
The essence of our Maker.
I'm sorry?
We could understand that which our Maker projects to bring forth the universe, because that has been handed to us to understand, although much of it is deep and esoteric, but we can never understand the essence of our Maker.
Yes, I understand that. Yeah. We can never understand the essence of our Maker. It's beyond our ken. It's beyond our ability to know. And we were never intended to know.
Moses tried.
I'm sorry?
Later on in the book, you'll find out how Moses tried.
Okay. Later on in the book. So here we are, Levi, and I just read in C. Freeman, where it was said by the Rabbi that honor the question is part of the truth. Without the question, there can be no realization of the truth. And so I'm simply following the Rebbe's instruction to honor the question, while at the same time feeling more ignorant than I have in decades upon decades upon decades upon decades, and simply coming to grips with it because it's so obvious. So enough said. Thank you for joining me this week. Thank me for joining you this week. Is there anything you'd like to say in passing?
I just want to say that stay safe and stay focused on good thoughts that educate us and bring light to us, because it's all in the mind, and our mind can drive us in such beautiful places, even under circumstances like today. So let's take advantage of that possibility, as you're doing if you're watching this.
Let me say one more thing. People who have reached out to me, talk to me about the fact that they're watching this, and this just happened. It just happens. To a person, they absolutely love you. Hear me. And I think they wonder how you can put up with my continued belligerence in such good spirits with such good humor.
Well, you just answered it yourself. It's not belligerence. It's creating a vessel. So I'm always pleased when I hear the new vessel coming.
Thank you, Levi.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.